We're very grateful that you're here. Thank you so much. And Senators, if it works, what we'll do is we'll hold questions until the end. And really appreciate you being here, Ms. Johnson. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. George Stewart, a consulting child and adolescent psychiatrist with Seneca Family of Agencies. Thank you so much for being here. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Senator. I'm very pleased to be invited and appreciate the opportunity to make some points. I wanted to make 3 points and then elaborate on them in my talk. The first is that the research base for the safety and efficacy of psychotropic medication use in children is inadequate. The second point is that child psychiatrists and pediatricians are put in untenable positions in their work with traumatized youth, leading to the overprescription of medications. And the third point is that traumatized children are healed through supportive, loving relationships. Medications merely suppress symptoms. The research base supporting the use of psychopharmaceuticals in children is both thin and corrupted. I wish I had something for your cough, but I'm a psychiatrist. You can tell me how it feels. Most medications are prescribed off-label, that is, for uses in children that have not been approved by the FDA. The psychopharmaceutical industry is immense. $320 billion worldwide in 2013, and growing that year at 17% per year. More is spent on marketing than on research and development. The research process, called the trial system, clinical trials, is broken according to prominent scholars. Conflicts of interest abound, with drug companies funding their own studies and reimbursing the physicians who are conducting the studies. Study results unfavorable to a drug are buried, and there are no long-term studies of the effects of these medications on the developing brain of children. Point 2, foster children have been multiply traumatized, including living in violent and chaotic environments, suffering sexual and physical abuse, witnessing domestic violence, enduring homelessness, and so forth. They are often fearful and reactive. They often use violence toward themselves, towards others, or toward the environment as an adaptive strategy. Child psychiatrists and pediatricians, for pediatricians, prescribe about a third of the psychotropics to children, to foster children, are asked to help with the foster child's symptoms and behaviors, often in times of crisis. The resources to be definitively helpful are often not available, so they prescribe a medication. The actions of the medications are very nonspecific. So I was trying to think of a metaphor. It's a little like doing vascular surgery with sharpened sticks. If the medication only helps a bit, then often another is added, and so forth, as the child accumulates side effects from multiple medications. I have commonly seen children, especially discharged from an acute hospital stay, taking 3 to 5 medications. I've seen one child who was taking 8 medications simultaneously. There are no studies of using 3 or more medications simultaneously in children, and very few of 2. So how can we respond? In addition to developing guidelines for the prescription and monitoring of these medications in children, as is being developed by the QIP, and strengthening the JV220 process, which is also underway, we need to provide these children with the resources that will help them heal. Medications at best only temporarily suppress symptoms. They do not cure, as does penicillin with pneumonia or strep throat. And I think this is a misconception that parents have and that many people have who aren't as close to it. What can heal traumatized youth are loving, supportive relationships in conditions of safety that endure over time. And I think all of those are important to consider, including endure over time. These require considerable support and a full continuum of services, especially crisis services, which is often when children are more heavily medicated, tailored to their needs. Our most vulnerable and discarded children deserve our best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Very grateful for your thoughts and for your dedication to foster youth as well. Thank you so much for being here. It is now my pleasure to be able to introduce Jennifer Rodriguez. She is the Executive Director of the Youth Law Center. And Ms. Rodriguez, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, members. So I'm one of the old-timers who was here 10 years ago, testifying in front of the legislature at the informational hearing on this very topic. At the time, there was a cry to action after this issue had been raised repeatedly by young people who were in foster care, who were grappling with the effects of these life-altering drugs, and also by media coverage that highlighted the dangerous combinations that we heard about and how little regulation there was. At that time, I was representing the California Youth Connection, and my testimony was about the personal impacts that these drugs had had on my own health, on my own coping mechanisms. And I brought with me dozens of CYC members who testified to members about conditions such as heart murmurs, about rapid weight gain, about fertility problems as adults, and about the emotional side effects that ended up being worse than the underlying original condition that prompted the use of medication. Today, I'm testifying as a lawyer and the executive director of the Youth Law Center, and while that piece has changed, the underlying policy issues that drive our system to medicate youth, they haven't changed. Not yet. So I'm hopeful that what has changed is the receptiveness to treat this issue as urgent and to provide this next generation of children and youth the family support and those loving, supportive relationships, and most importantly, parenting, that's necessary to protect against the inappropriate prescription of and over-reliance on psychotropic medications. No matter how much regulation and protection is put in place, the elephant in the room is that psychiatrists, social workers, courts, lawyers, and mental health clinicians heavily rely on caregivers to be the consistent, knowledgeable, reliable historian for what the child has experienced, for the symptoms that they have, for how those symptoms fit in the context of their environment, and if psych meds are prescribed, to communicate how the youth react, whether their symptoms improve or worsen, and to closely monitor the effects and the side effects to protect youth from serious harm. What we also know is that more than half of the youth who are living in California's residential group homes, and the rate is about sort of 40% of all of the youth who are prescribed meds, are living in environments where their caregivers are none of those things. They are cared for by minimum wage staff who are untrained, they are inexperienced, they work 8-hour shifts typically, they turn over more than anybody turns over in our entire system. These young people who are in those facilities, they are not parented. They do not have loving, caring, consistent relationships with caregivers. They do not have anybody who is knowledgeable, who is stable, or who is reliable as the custodian of their history. This, in my opinion, is the biggest systemic factor that's influencing our over-reliance and inappropriate use of psychotropic medications. We hear from attorneys, social workers, probation officers that caregivers demand that young people be put on psychotropic medications in order to keep placements, in order to deal with behaviors. Over the last 2 years, we have been working with a group of international researchers who look at developmental science, and they have come up with a consensus statement, and in fact, research is telling us a much more damaging story about what we're doing to young people related to group care. This statement has just been published. It's called the Consensus Statement on Group Care for Children and Adolescents, a statement of policy by the American Orthopsychiatric Association. And I will tell you this statement because I think it's powerful. And that's that every child has a basic right and need to grow up in a safe home with a stable, continuous relationship with at least one adult who is a trusted, committed parent figure. Group settings should not be used as living arrangements because of their inherently detrimental effect on the healthy development of children, regardless of age. This is the issue that's underlying our use of psychotropic medications. By their nature, congregate care facilities are difficult to operate and even more difficult for youth to heal and to grow up in. What ends up happening is that we respond not to organic issues, but to the environment, the loneliness, the defiance, and the behavioral environments that that very environment creates. In fact, in looking at research on congregate care facilities that care for very different populations, the elderly and developmentally disabled folks, we see that the rates of psychotropic medication use, they're almost identical. They're markedly similar. The conditions are similar, even though the populations are different, and they consider in those facilities the high rates to be a failure of treatment. There are several factors that influence the conditions in congregate care, and the push to psychotropic medication. There's the grouping of young people, all of whom are struggling with similar issues, all of whom have a history of trauma, abuse, and neglect, who all learn behaviors, coping mechanisms, and do what teenagers do, which is be influenced by peer behavior. There is a lack of facility ability to individualize the mental health care that youth so desperately need. Young people are not parented. There is limited access to activities and alternatives, and we see the problems and conditions continue to arise. What we know is that effective treatment and interventions do not require and are in fact inconsistent with group care. It's wasteful. We are spending huge amounts of money on the wrong thing when we could be getting equal or better results for a fraction of the cost. What we do know works are things like therapeutic foster care, wraparound services. In one of our counties that has the highest rate of group care in California, Sonoma County, we have actually seen them reduce by half the amount of young people who are in group care over the past year and a half or so. And the way they have done that is by moving children into families with wraparound services. And talking to one of the wrap providers, they told me that their services are more for the family than they are for the youth. 2 hours of therapy for the family for every 1 hour that they're doing with the young people. We will see our statistics continue to reflect this over-reliance and inappropriate use of psych medications until we really prioritize moving children out of congregate care facilities and into settings and families where they can get that parenting and where parents, relative caregivers, and foster parents get the support and services necessary to care for these children. That will take a partnership between child welfare and mental health to see that partnership fully materialized. We are very encouraged and excited about the continuum of care efforts that are being prioritized by CDSS and fully support those efforts. We are hoping that the legislature follows closely behind and also prioritizes those efforts, and we feel that those are really key to seeing things change for young people who are prescribed psychotropic medications. Thank you.
Ms. Rodriguez, thank you so much, and we're grateful you're here, and I mean this with all due respect. I'm sorry you had to come back 10 years later to have the same discussion.
Just don't make me come back 10 years from now.
Absolutely. We're grateful, and that is our goal here today. So we're so appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to be able to introduce Ms. Iris Hoffman. She is from Sonoma County and is a member of the California Youth Connection, and we're grateful that you've traveled here today, and it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators, for taking your time and energy and investing it into this extremely important issue. I am grateful beyond words that there's a whole room of powerful people sitting behind me, as well as you powerful change makers here willing to work on this issue. Like you said, I'm an intern for California Youth Connection, and I work for the organization Voices Sonoma, which is also an organization that serves former and current foster youth and youth that have been in systems of care. I spent the majority of my adolescence in out-of-home placement, juvenile hall, treatment centers, group home-like situations, and I unfortunately spent most of those years on different psychotropic medications as well. So when I say I'm beyond grateful to be here, most of that's because I have a voice now. I have my voice back. I have some power. All those things were taken away from me when I had medications prescribed to me, and I have to say almost forced down my throat, not literally, but when you're in those situations, there's all kinds of punishments and things you have to be fearful of if you are to refuse medication that's prescribed to you by a psychiatrist that only meets with you for an hour a month and administered to you by staff that, like was mentioned earlier, are probably paid minimum wage, have minimal education. It's scary. It was scary for me, and I know it's scary for those that are still in the system because I work with them on a daily basis. I'm coming to you today to speak from my heart and to paint a picture of what it's like to be in these situations, because I understand most people don't have any idea, and it's hard to have a sense of urgency when you don't know what it's like or when you haven't had an opportunity to hear what it's like firsthand. I remember lining up with more than half of the girls that I was in group home settings with to receive our meds and then proceed to class, sleep through our first few classes, dozing off. This is more than half of us, you know? And we'd sit at the lunch tables and talk about how we didn't want to be on these medications, but we were scared to say no. And those of us who did, you lose points. You have to sit at the kitchen table. You can't talk to anybody all day. These are the kinds of punishments you face. Or you might be worried that you won't be able to leave the placement that you're in because you're being non-compliant, because you don't want to take the medications that are prescribed to you by people that hardly know you. It's a very scary reality, and we can't wait another decade. In fact, every day that we sit here not doing anything about this, which I'm glad we're doing something now, I'm glad we're all here, but every day that this issue has no movement happening, that we're not making changes happen, is another day that there's tons of young people out there having to take those pills and having to face this reality of disempowerment. That's what it is. Maybe feeling like they have no voice, no trusting and loving, supportive relationships. It's really hard to trust someone who's telling you that and forcing you to take medications that you don't feel are right for yourself to be taking. I also want to share with everybody that's here that Seroquel, Abilify, Ativan, all things that I was prescribed before I was even 18 years old, they never helped me heal any of the trauma that I had been through. But what did help me was working for organizations like Voices, California Youth Connection, getting my voice back and sitting at tables like this, feeling like I had a hand in the change that was happening, and I had my voice, and I was able to make something happen and put the trauma that I had experienced to a kind of use in my life. So I guess the recommendations that I have are this urgency. You know, we need to move this forward. We need to make these changes, because I don't want my peers, I don't want these young people to have to experience what I did. I don't want anyone to feel how I did during my adolescence. And I hope that everything that I've said has really conveyed that to you. I hope that a lot of changes are made with the training of the staff that are administering the medication. I know that I shouldn't have been on all those medications I was on. Neither should have most of my peers in these situations. I think we all are in agreement that a lot needs to be changed, and I just want to share that it needs to change sooner rather than later. So thank you for hearing me. Thank you so much. Like I said, I'm beyond grateful, and for all of you senators here today, and for everybody else sitting behind me in this room. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hoffman, you were incredibly eloquent, and your voice was loud and clear, and we're grateful that you're here. And do want to say thank you to Voices. They are very active in the North Bay area, as well as in Salinas, and given opportunities for foster youth. And again, you have just done them very proud today. So thank you. I would like to be able to open it up, questions or comments from the senators, and we'll start with Majority Leader Monty.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to offer my thanks to you and Senator Bell, all who've helped organize, and especially to those of you here today to share your experiences, ideas, and recommendations. I have a question for Ms. Hoffman, and also just, you're a very articulate, very powerful speaker, and you mentioned part of what helped you gain your own voice was the work with California Youth Connection. But could you share what were some instrumental supports or individuals or therapies, what allowed you to emerge as strongly as you have? How can we replicate that for other youth?
So when I got out of my last out-of-home placement, returned to live with my parents, it was actually a therapist advocate that connected me with a different organization that eventually placed me at Voices. That's where I first worked, and then later became connected with California Youth Connection. I think a lot more outreach needs to be done in group homes, juvenile halls, any kind of out-of-home placement. There need to be people going in, like probably people like myself and other staff, youth staff, young people that work for organizations like this, and sharing their stories and talking about the opportunities that exist. And I think it would have even been beneficial for me. Actually, I know it would have been beneficial for me to have opportunities like I have now while I was still in placement, to have my voice back and begin the healing process earlier. Some of the things that have been the most powerful for me is sitting down one-on-one with powerful people within my community, leaders, community organizers, and basically being told by them that my experiences weren't in vain, that I would be able to use all of this in my life. And then from there, having the opportunity to speak in front of people of power and have my voice heard in those kind of settings as well.